Hey, what's up, everybody? It's me, Rob Ryan. I am back with another incredible, insightful episode of Entrepreneurial Thinkers this week. If you've ever picked up a prescription or your drugs at a local pharmacy, or if you have a local pharmacy in your neighborhood that is like essentially also kind of the bodega down to the corner that you go to for your sundry items or your toothpaste or something like that, and you've ever stopped to think about that pharmacy and how it interacts with you and its business, or you've never stopped to think about it and understand where it fits, especially here in the United States, where it fits in kind of the supply chain of our healthcare system, which is so notoriously broken, and how and what role that pharmacy that you go into in your local neighborhood, or that you know that your parents go to, or that your grandparents go to, how that pharmacy fits inside that system and inside of our kind of quote unquote broken healthcare system that we have in the US. This episode is one that you do not want to miss listening to. I am joined by Amantha Bagdon, who was referred to us by Mickey Reynolds from Slauson & Co., our recent guest and great friend of the show. And Amantha is the founder and CEO of RXPost, and the work that her company is doing and the technology that her company is unleashing inside of the independent pharmacy markets, community pharmacies around the United States is incredible. It's integral to helping unlock the efficiencies and the inefficiencies inside of that part of the industry. And all of that eventually kind of filters through to creating better experiences for us as consumers, greater efficiencies, hopefully eventually maybe even contribute to lower costs in some ways, although the pharmacies aren't responsible for that, but also just to better patient outcomes. So if you're interested in that, if you cross paths, if a pharmacy or prescription drugs is a part of your life, you're going to want to enjoy this episode because there's a ton to learn, and also just an incredibly inspiring, positive, pragmatically optimistic entrepreneurial story in Amantha's own career arc as a young woman. So hope you enjoy it, and I hope you enjoy it as much as we did making it for you. Hola, hello, hi, bienvenido, and welcome back, or welcome to Entrepreneurial Thinkers. As you know, if you're a regular listener or if you're just joining us for the first time, this is the show where I get the privilege of having weekly conversations with some of the brightest entrepreneurial thinkers across all sectors of society and industry today, in hopes that our coming together in conversation tries to leave the world a little bit better than we found it. Today, I'm really excited to be joined by Amantha Bagdon, founder and CEO of RXPost. So I'm going to tell you a bit about her before we get into our conversation. Amantha is an entrepreneurial thinker whose entire career has been focused on the insides of an industry that nearly all of us interact with at some point in our lives, but probably don't think about very often, the local pharmacy. She graduated from UC San Diego, where she studied pharmacological chemistry and set off on a journey that today, at least in my view, as I look back in retrospect, kind of almost looks preordained, although I bet that's not how it played out. From longtime successful pharmacy tech at a number of big retail pharmacy chains to program coordinator, and now founder and entrepreneur, Amantha and her company RXPost are revolutionizing how pharmacies manage their inventory. Amantha and her team tackle inefficiencies in this huge industry by using data-driven solutions to eliminate medication shortages and waste, which in turn helps the pharmacies operate better, which ideally, hopefully, leads to better patient outcomes. Her journey from working behind the pharmacy counter, so to speak, to leading a game-changing platform is rooted fundamentally in her passion for science, her problem-solving nature, and her general approach to her life and business, which advocates for a more sustainable healthcare system. And as I say often on this show, aren't the rest of us lucky that there is someone like Amantha out there in the world obsessing over this problem on a daily basis for us? So Amantha, welcome to Entrepreneurial Thinkers. It's super great to have you today.
Thank you for having me, Rob. I think obsession is definitely the right word to describe how I feel about pharmacy.
That's awesome. Well, as I alluded to there, this is something that I think all of us interact with at some point in our lives, like whether it might not be the local pharmacy, maybe it's your local big chain pharmacy, right? But we cross paths with it. But it also, as I thought about in preparation for this conversation today, it's also probably something that very few of us on this side of the table as consumers really, really understand. So that's kind of where I'd like to start if we could, right? Before we eventually get into your story, and you're going to tell us all about RXPost and what it does and why. and you're going to help us understand the industry overall, and maybe even kind of some of the bigger issues beyond just the industry. But I want to start with kind of this big picture, maybe, broad consumer question, right? So we all know that the healthcare system in the US is challenged or broken at best, right? That drug costs specifically and access to drugs seems like wildly inefficient in its best scenario. So I would love for you to help us understand, like, how did we all, or how have you begun to bring what I call entrepreneurial thinking to this problem that touches almost all of us on a daily basis?
I think it starts with kind of helping people understand how the pharmacy operates a little bit more, and kind of where the pharmacy industry is going as a whole in a post-pandemic world.
Okay.
And I think one of the things that people are shocked to find out, pharmacists, they have their doctorate's degree. They went to 4 years of undergrad, 4 years of pharmacy school. They have a doctorate in pharmacy. But unlike other medical professional fields, they do not currently get reimbursed for their time. They only get paid per prescription. And I think that's kind of what you see a lot right now in the headlines about the FTC suing the PBMs and a lot of these independent pharmacies being squeezed, is the payment model is really broken. And when consumers and patients go to the pharmacy, regardless of where it's at, and they think, yeah, man, this medication's really expensive, the pharmacy's making so much money. And that's not the case. That's the insurance dictating your copay a lot of the times, and that covers the cost of the drug. Hopefully, a lot of the times you see pharmacies losing money on filling prescriptions.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and so there's now this industry shift towards how can the pharmacy be more proactive in clinical care, and that definitely came out of the pandemic.
Okay, so all right, so and you hit on it already, so I'm just going to go back and let's double down on this. I think you're right. Like, the best starting point is to extrapolate here a little bit and like help the average consumer just better understand how the whole industry works. I scribbled down a couple things. You just start dropping acronyms. So I'm going to take us back, and we're going to break down some of these acronyms. Most of the listeners to the show should know or understand the FTC is the Federal Trade Commission. We got that part right. But that PBM, I think I know what it is, but that's because I'm a nerd. But I don't know that everybody's going to know what that is. So let's explain what that is. And then why don't you start to explain like how that fits? Like, what is the industry before it meets us as the consumer?
Sure. And that's a great thing to point out. Healthcare has a lot of acronyms. It's like we speak our own language, but a PBM is a pharmacy benefit manager. They are the middleman between collecting money from insurance companies like Aetna and distributing payments to the pharmacy based on those contracts. So the administrators, and I think they
So the industry kind of, over my lifetime, 56, so like over the industry kind of created its own like middle layer, or someone came along to the industry and said like, hey, we're this middle layer, like we can make your job easier, more efficient, help you save money, help you make more, something. And now we've got this big bureaucratic system.
Yeah, and it made sense where Aetna is going to have difficulty contracting with 80, 90,000 pharmacies, is what it was a few decades ago, and handling all the payments and disbursements to these pharmacies based on different contracts that they have. And so that's where the pharmacy benefit managers, PBMs, came in to manage. Where it really, I think, got away from the industry is there was no transparency and no oversight as to what they're collecting from the insurance companies and what they're doing to the pharmacies, which is called the spread. And you'll often hear from advocates of independent pharmacy is that because there's a lack of transparency into these pricing models that are overcharging insurance companies, underpaying pharmacies, and keeping a bulk of it for themselves, driving up a lot of these healthcare costs.
Okay, and to be fair to you, like, I'm not going to hold you to solving all of the healthcare problems today, right? We're going to talk about the work that you do through RXPost and that part of the industry. But in the spirit of kind of framing the big thing before we break it down to the small one, is it fair to say that then these PBMs and this lack of transparency and kind of government oversight, accountability, like this is just a like, hey, we let the private sector come in and we thought it sounded good, and then we kind of let them run wild, and now the consumer hears a news story about why that thing that they could have bought in France for like $7 costs like $700 here in the U.S. Is this layer part of that problem?
Yeah, there's definitely a culmination of issues at hand, not going into the drug pricing aspect from the drug makers. But
Yeah.
yeah, if you have family or friends overseas and you talk to them about Ozempic and the cost of Ozempic and it's under $200, but here, it's over $1,000. And the PBMs aren't only responsible.
It's not only them, but
Yeah.
they're a piece of this.
Yeah, but everyone's taking advantage of the rules and regulations the U.S. has set forth, and so
Yeah.
that's why I'm active in advocacy and policy work, because if we're going to see changes, it has to be from within.
Yeah, no, it's incredible. Again, super complex, nuanced, so many layers to this. Let's talk about the piece that I mean, you're passionate obviously about all of it, and I'm sure you talk about all of this to all of your friends all the time. But let's just today try and focus, as to be fair to you, on the piece that you work in inside of every day. So one of the things I read in preparing is like your company emphasizes that it helps independent pharmacies or community pharmacies. So help again the average person understand like what's the difference between your clients, the independent or community pharmacy, and say the CVS that's right down the corner from me, or the Target that's around the street from that one.
Yeah, so your independent pharmacy is your local mom and pop pharmacy, and the level of customer service that you experience at these mom and pop pharmacies, definitely surpasses some of the service levels of the big chains, because the big chains, they have different goals, they have different expectations, they're beholden to shareholders, whereas the local independent pharmacies, they're really beholden to their patients and doing a good job and practicing at the top of their license in every interaction.
Yeah. Do again, naive everyman question, right? I live in Hollywood, you live in downtown LA, so like super dense, urban, kind of neighborhoods where, in my case, right, I wasn't lying. I wasn't metaphorically saying there's a CVS and a Target. Like there's a CVS and a Target within probably half a block of my house. And I can't think of, and I walk like 5 miles a day around East Hollywood, West Hollywood, Los Feliz. I can't think of the last time in my mind that I like walked past an independent or community pharmacy, but there obviously are lots of them. Like how big a portion of the industry are they still?
We are everywhere. So as
Yeah.
as an entrepreneur and founder, I'm actively right now fundraising and speaking to investors. And one of the most shocking, I think, statistics that I share with them is independent pharmacies actually outnumber the chains.
See,
So
there you go. That's crazy to me.
5% of all the U.S. pharmacies, the retail pharmacies, and like as you're naming off these cities, I'm just like, oh, there's Capital Drugs on that street.
Right. Okay. And so that's the funny part. I bet when I go on my walk tonight, like now my mind will be attuned to it and I will see what I probably wasn't seeing before.
Yep, they're everywhere, especially in Los Angeles.
Okay. Is that especially in Los Angeles? Is that like a particular, like just because we're such a big, huge, diverse city, or was there?
I'm based here in Los Angeles. I do a lot of founder-led sales. I think we'll touch on it a little bit later. But I go door to door, so I physically have an understanding of how many pharmacies are within such a dense area.
Yeah.
Serving a really large patient population, right? People need medications.
Yeah, and I would imagine again, naively so, like the more convenient it is to you, like everything else in our life, like the more predictable, the more convenient, and then the more I feel seen or known by the provider, like choosing like why I go to a favorite restaurant or why I go to a favorite coffee shop, like those same kind of human customer service attributes seem to be the priorities with the independent pharmacies. How do they compete just as businesses?
It's difficult, right? It's difficult because you have these chains that have basically dominated the pharmacy vertical and are now expanding outside the pharmacy vertical into complete healthcare verticals. So, for example, CVS Pharmacy owns Aetna Insurance. They own CVS Caremark PBM. They recently bought, I think a primary care business, so that, harping back to that convenience thing, convenience does serve a purpose for a good chunk of people, but there's still another good chunk of people where trust and reliability are really important. And that's where your local independent pharmacies really come into play. They really go above and beyond. Countless times. I'm thinking of a time where I was working in the pharmacy and we place our orders every single night. And 8:00 at night, I'm going to bed and I'm just like, oh my God, I forgot to place the order, and like running to my computer, logging in.
For somebody or for a group of people for the next day pickup or the next day pickup or something.
Yeah, and I don't think you're gonna see that service at places that aren't your local mom and pop service shops.
Right. Sure. Because the big retail chain, nothing against like the individuals that work there, right? But somebody forgets something, they've already clocked off their shift, like they're done. They're at home, right? There is nobody until the next shift starts at a certain time. And then sorry, we were late sorry, your prescription's not arrived yet.
Yeah. I know amazing people that work there. I think, some of the incentives are misaligned, but I'm hopeful that the industry will get there.
That's fascinating. Okay, so tell us all about RXPost. Like, kind of this, like, give us, because I think what we can do is we can learn more about your company, and then we can use it to kind of, again, just explore some of the more nuanced parts of this whole problem/opportunity, right? So tell us what it does. Tell us who you serve. Tell us kind of how your services help your clients succeed, and then we can talk about kind of where you see it going from here.
So RXPost, we help pharmacies sell their unused drugs to other pharmacies. And the reason that I started this company was, as a pharmacy technician at an independent pharmacy, at the end of the day, it is a retail business. Pharmacies have to purchase all those life-saving drugs that are on the shelf, which sometimes leads to them having expired inventory, and it's detrimental financially to a business. And at the independent pharmacy I was at, if we got stuck with an expensive medication that we couldn't necessarily use for any other patients, maybe the original patient we ordered it for moved, transferred, was forced to go to mail order, we would actually call to other local pharmacies in Beverly Hills and try to find another pharmacy that was going to dispense it to their patient, right? So the medication's not going to use. We get to sell it off for, a slight loss, but it's not a full loss. And that was my job. That was my job, to pick up the phone, call, 3 to 4 clients in the area to see if they have patient need, and then coordinating delivery, and then coordinating how we got paid, and what that looks like is writing on a piece of paper.
I was just going to say, like,
pharmacy owes us $5,000. Like, make sure you follow up and get the check. And I just always thought, if this piece of paper falls off the wall underneath the abyss of the refrigerator, never to be seen again, there's just no accounting for it. And I've, thought, if there was
take an intermission here. So essentially what you just described, which I'm listening to, and I'm picturing, like, so you described it so eloquently, like coordinating this, but I'm listening to between the words and I'm thinking, that's Amantha. It's like picking up the phone and going like, hey, do you have need? Oh, you don't? Okay. All right, cool. Next one in the list. Like, oh, hey, like, and I'm going to use a phrase that dates me, like the phone book, right? Like the next page of the phone book, right? Like, oh, okay. Hey, Joe's Pharmacy on the West Side. Like, hey, no, you don't know. Oh, hey, you have a need. Okay, cool. All right. And then coordinating delivery, I'm literally like, oh, this means Amantha's getting in her car or taking the bus and like going across town with this like precious thing that she's sold to these people.
Am I going? Are we sending a driver? Are you sending a driver?
Holy cow. And then the financial end of it kicks in. Like what if it's not someone as kind and generous and earnest as Amantha, and it's like random Suzanne, who's having a bad day at the end of a bad year, and she just decides to take that $5,000 and like go abscond with it.
Well, that's why it's only like the opportunity is only 3 or 4 other pharmacies, because it's the ones that we have that rapport with. We just call around to, one, we don't have that time to call around, and two, like there's just not that level of trust to complete the transaction, or the legitimacy, right? How do I know this is really another pharmacy calling? And kind of RXPost set out to solve all those things.
And back at the top level of this food chain of problems and inefficiencies, like just the idea that we order things, and it seems, I guess, strange because it's the pharmacy, right? But it's so common in other industries, as I'm running through my head here. Like, a restaurant has food waste, right? Like they purchased too many cucumbers and then we didn't sell enough cucumber salads that week or whatever it is. And so we've got to do something with that before it goes bad, except in that case, it's literally going to go bad really fast. And so the something they do with it is probably donated to a food bank or something like that. In your case, you're like, this is still like, we can't use it for our purposes for why we ordered it, but we still have this inventory of it. And we need to monetize that somehow, or literally it's just money going down the drain.
Yeah. And right? Like the other thing is like, someone out there is going to use it. How do you find that person, right? Like, some pharmacy is going to dispense it. How do you make it really easy to basically find that drug a new home in a place where it's going to get used and not wasted?
And all of this is going on behind in this industry, in these businesses, between these businesses, in every city wherever they exist, or even I would imagine harder for the poor independent pharmacist who's like in some rural community, like 70 miles outside of Lincoln, Nebraska, and then he or she, their only alternative to offload that wasted inventory is to like drive it to Lincoln. Right. Yeah. I mean, like, so that's insane. That's all going on behind the scenes, behind the counter, so to speak, that the consumer who just wants to pick up their heart medication has no idea this is going on.
Yeah. And it's not like a restaurant where it's just like, oh, we're out of avocados, so we're just going to serve burgers without avocados. This happens a lot in hospital systems too, where they borrow from other health systems because someone needs a medication. They need a medication. And even in the health systems, they have a dedicated person picking up the phone, going through the list, like call this place first, this place second, this place third. How do we coordinate? Again, delivery. Theirs is an interesting model because they actually don't do payments. They do borrow loan. And then the next day when they're able to replenish their own inventory, they had to coordinate sending it back to the other place.
Oh, wow. So they're doing like little trade, like product trades, like bartering. Yep. Essentially, without the cash part.
Yeah, so many inefficiencies.
My goodness. Okay, so all of that, like literally, this was your job, and you got exposed to that problem, and you're like, the proverbial entrepreneurial phrase, "There's got to be a better way."
Got to be a better way. Yes.
And then you did what?
So interestingly enough, like I didn't really actively set out to go, I think, pursue this as a business, but I felt like it was something that needed to be solved. And I got the opportunity to pitch the idea of what I believe RXPost could be, this network of pharmacies, this marketplace where we're handling all the transactions, to some college kids at UC Irvine as part of their computer science capstone program, their senior projects. And they made this really rough beta. We used PayPal to send money back and forth. We kept getting flagged for fraudulent activity because it's medication.
Right.
But I made it work. I took it back to my network of pharmacies in Los Angeles. I was on site helping them as much as possible and was able to get feedback. And through really strong encouragement from my family, who said, look, we're going to invest, like this, you're onto something. And we believe in you. We believe in your ability to execute and your passion in this space to go out and try. And so that's exactly what I did.
Wow.
At this point, though, I wasn't familiar with startups. I had never talked to other founders. I didn't know.
You were literally the person that was solving that problem of drug redistribution and financing. Like you were expert at that.
I'm just Googling like how do I structure my company, and like
Right.
Googling like how do I find a good dev job, and like going through the
Oh,
interview
goodness.
process and not knowing anything. And that interviewing of dev shops was a very interesting process.
Yeah.
Going through the building
Yeah.
process was tough, but as the project started to go off tracks, I actually recruited one of the original students from UCI to come
Oh,
back
wow.
and salvage. And well, we put band-aids on there. We got it launched. We got it launched in late August 2022. And then I did what I did. The only thing I do now is go out, visit pharmacies, and get them on board for sales. And as you got to hear from Mickey's recent podcast with you, fax marketing, because
Yeah.
I know in the pharmacy we receive faxes, we pick it up and we look at it. No matter what, we look at it before determining like, does this go in the trash? And so this is how
There,
we get customers.
there were two parts of that story when she told it that, other than what I already told you before we got on air, which is just a fascination with the complexities of this problem, which I've never thought about before. But those two parts of your own personal background and like how you go about your job jumped off at me because one, I don't remember. I think I may have said it on there, but I definitely said it to her afterwards. Like when I was coming out of school and working for my dad, like in 1988 or 89, like he got a fax machine, and that was the biggest technological advancement in the history of the family and the business, and it was such a huge deal. And at that time, he was like teaching me lessons that he would go on to teach me more of, which was just that the technology doesn't really matter. Like it's whatever is the mode or medium of communication with that particular group of people that they're comfortable with, that you can use. That's just another way to connect. And then the other part of it was just how similar in some ways, like your and my experiences have been, in the sense that I grew up and was trained initially in just what you have done, like except it was not what you're doing now, essentially field sales, but what you did before, where you were basically just prospecting for relationships to offload these drug products and knocking on doors, so to speak. And that's just such a amazing reality to hear in today's current everything is digital, everything is remote kind of world. I was immediately struck by like, wow, I want to meet this young woman because she's living a life now and she probably doesn't necessarily even appreciate how many other people have lived the exact same life, maybe in a different industry or different time or era. Because you're just doing basically the basics. Like you are doing the good old school 101, walking the pavement kind of basics, which is incredible to hear.
And not
And
to make
you're doing it successfully, which is even better.
And not to make us feel any more dated than we should, but I was speaking to some VC fellows. They're in college, and I bring up fax marketing, and they're like, "What's fax?
What's
marketing?
a fax? Yeah.
What's a fax?" And then I realized I was like, I don't know if I have the wherewithal to really explain how faxes work. I'm like, well, there's a telephone line that goes to call, and there's this big clunky machine, and you put paper in there, and
That's incredible.
It's a wild thing because it is such antiquated technology. It is actually more secure and HIPAA compliant.
Oh, sure.
Can't hack a fax machine.
Right.
Maybe
no, I mean, right. I would. No one's trying anyways. Yeah, exactly. But no, to your point, yeah, it's essentially unintentionally air gapped from the rest of the world, right? In the traditional old hardwired sense of the. It's incredible. It's awesome story, and what a classic origin story, right? I often say like entrepreneurs are either this route where you're in the middle of something, and the problem, the challenges become so obvious to you that you're like someone's got to try and solve this, right? And that was my first company, late '90s software. I was in field sales, and I was like, this was pre CRM. That's how old I am. We used to call it like it used to be point solutions. It used to be like 6 different pieces, right? And then CRM was people sticking it together. And I was like, there's got to be better ways to do this. And then you just feel compelled to like give it a shot and try. And you don't think like about being an entrepreneur. And I didn't think about that. Like you become that almost as a byproduct of the pursuit of trying to solve the problem with the skills that you have. Which is awesome to hear from your perspective. So let's talk about your clients and kind of the benefits that they see, right? So why is the work that RXPost does, like, how does that help its clients? Why is it helping its clients? And is there a benefit of this to like how we started kind of from the consumer standpoint? Like, does the healthcare slash drug distribution pharmacy business that we hit as consumers, does that wind up better and more efficient because of the work that you do helping these independent pharmacies?
Yeah, I think, first of all, to throw in a nice statistic is the average pharmacy will lose the average retail pharmacy. So this is the industry as a whole will lose $150,000 on expired inventory.
Oh, wow.
Right. And given
every year?
Every year, and given
Okay.
that there's 65,000 pharmacies, and then you throw in like health systems, hospitals, where a lot of those drugs are exorbitant. That's a lot of wasted medication, and that's a lot of wasted money, and ultimately, like us as consumers, we're footing the bill of overproduction.
Sure.
So helping pharmacies just kind of recapture some of those losses is, my immediate goal is if we can take out some of that burden and that stress and decrease those losses, what would you do as a business to reinvest in yourself?
That's
And that's
awesome.
the longer term strategy of where I see pharmacies going, and kind of helping them invest in themselves as community health hubs.
Right, which it feels like both it feels like as a consumer we need more of, and then also to your illusory point you made earlier, right, about like some of the big brands. I mean, that's kind of been above this level of our conversation. That's been the battle or the chase for this last 5-7 years or so, right? Is like, the Amazons are like, we need to be in local clinics and in every neighborhood. And it's almost this kind of like new businesses trying to throw back the model to the way that it used to work when it worked actually for people like in your neighborhood, right? And so now you're saying like, how can you're like, hey, I'm going to help you save money and be more efficient and save, like, have less lost product. What could you do with that extra $100,000, $150,000, and how could you turn yourself into an even more valuable community health hub type approach to your business, as opposed to just the pharmacy, just prescription slinger, so to speak?
I think I've just talked to so many pharmacy owners, even like generational pharmacy owners, where their parents are pharmacists and parents are pharmacists. And I think, this nostalgia for how pharmacy used to be, how apothecaries used to be, how trusted and reliable that they were, and they still are. But unlike the old times, you can't go to the pharmacy and get the help that you want because sometimes the insurance says not here. Sorry.
Right.
And I think as we push more towards a clinical model, and we have the data to support that, having these local community pharmacies available to service those neighborhoods is going to be really beneficial to broader healthcare outcomes, like you said.
Yeah. No, I mean, it seems, what's old is new again, as my dad used to say, right? I mean, and it also just seems inevitable. And you highlighted it for us in the beginning, kind of in this post-pandemic reality, right? And that doesn't just mean these couple of years. That just means like from the point where we're going to mark history and say like, 20, I sidebar, I call this period we're in right now, like 2020 to 2025 ish, 26, kind of the great intermission. Like I literally think we're going to look back and go, oh, there was a world trajectory that was like post World War II to 2020, like 70 years. And then there's going to be a world trajectory that's going to be like 2025, 26-ish to like 2085. And this is the period where a lot of this is happening in all kinds of industries and segments of society, where we're all kind of going like, wait, like maybe the way we were doing it up until this unexpected intermission point, like, wasn't actually working anymore. It wasn't really servicing us. It wasn't really serving us. It wasn't serving society as a whole. Maybe there's either better ways to do it. And I think the old assumption, and maybe I'm validating you to some degree, like the old assumption was kind of just running forward. It was everything in life was up and to the right. Right. And so it's just going to be like, oh, it'll be technological innovation, it'll be digitized, it'll be robots. And it's the Jetsons. We wind up in the Jetsons episode and everything is great. right? And now I think we've caught ourselves and gone like, oh shit, like we're still not in the Jetsons era, and we should have been actually already. And maybe the truth is there's a lot of what used to work in the old ways that it worked in its industry, in its neighborhood, locally, more personal, more human, more reliable, more trustworthy, offline, that actually could still work if we just helped, if we moved the money around a little bit differently, or if we changed the, and that I hear a lot of that in what you're saying, which isn't just nostalgia, humbly. Like it is nostalgic, but it may be nostalgic for things that actually worked.
Yeah. And I think, maybe we get to the Jetson era in another 2 generations, but, like the generation that grew up with smartphones in their hands as children. And, the reason I say that, people ask me a lot about Amazon Pharmacy. And I think Amazon Pharmacy definitely serves a purpose, right? A lot of us are ordering food on our phones. A lot of us, we work on the go. We love having a telehealth visit and then having our medications sent to us. It serves the patient population. But we have the largest increase of enrollees entering Medicare age in the next decade. And we have that patient population, multiple disease states, multiple specialists. The pharmacy was seen as this one final check of, it doesn't matter how many different doctors you're seeing, if there's duplicate therapy, you have one pharmacy, and that one pharmacy will catch any of those mistakes. But now, as insurance has broken that up, it's, you can go to your local pharmacy to pick up your antibiotics same day, but your injectable, you have to get through specialty mail order and make sure that process is started 2 weeks in advance. And then anything else that's not covered, you can go to Mark Cuban's pharmacy because he's negotiating really great drug pricing, but like it's only on maybe 150 NDC, but SKUs, pharmacy SKUs.
Yeah.
So it's really putting a large patient population at risk of not catching where the mistakes are happening. And again, technology moving towards how do we have this interoperable exchange of information. You see a lot of EMR trying to lay off the acronyms.
That's okay. Electronic medical records, right?
Electronic health records.
There we go.
But one of my personal passions is when we talk about healthcare, pharmacy is not in that discussion enough, and it's literally half of the equation. And when you have the health hospital systems talking to primary care physicians, but that data is not getting translated to the point of dispensing to catch any final errors, it's a really big problem. And I'm excited because I'm really active in the policy work we do here in California, and some of the wording I had suggested last year at a policy committee meeting got adopted into our Pharmacist Trade Association policy. Awesome. And it was specifically around the interoperable exchange of information.
I had a feeling that phrase that you used earlier didn't just come out by accident.
No.
You're also making my job super easy because you're literally anticipating and answering and next questions in advance, which is awesome. Right. So let's give you your flowers for that. Let's talk about that a little bit, right? You're beyond your role as CEO, which is all consuming, and founder, entrepreneur, and out there knocking on doors and changing the pharmacy world and helping independent pharmacists on a daily basis to literally understand that if I can help you save $150,000, like how would you reinvest that in yourself? And don't you want to work with us? Like beyond all that, which is enough, that's 23 hours a day, right? You are also like a very active advocate for legislation. You're advising policymakers on these issues. And to your point, I read some of that in California's pharmacy laws specifically, like you're having some of your ideas or your feedback from the front lines is really having an impact. So tell us more about that, but then also tell us more about like, are these policies around pharmacies and transparency of information like different from state to state?
They are different from state to state.
Of course they are.
Such a patchwork of laws. And even though there is a national, basically trade association for the pharmacy profession, you one of the positives is you get to see what's working in some states and try to implement those into your own state. It does get frustrating though when you provide all of the same arguments, and yet the legislators just kind of can't really wrap their head around why
Right.
changes are so important, especially in the largest state in the nation.
Well, I was just going to say, because you may find like, oh, this works in Rhode Island, and then you're saying like hypothetically extrapolated, it could work in California, and California legislators are probably going like, we're literally like 17 Rhode Islands. Like, I don't know if Rhode Island's
And
like good
so
policy could scale,
right? So you have to kind of take this really complex idea of how pharmacy functions and condense it into a few minutes and get the point across of why it's really important to make these small changes now and the impact in the longer term.
And you are doing that successfully based on the example that you shared with us.
Yes.
And you're clearly very passionate about it.
Yeah. We recently had a Senate bill that got vetoed on the governor's desk this past weekend. Darn about PBM reform, but I think that just motivates us to work a little bit harder, and it's just really exciting to see. We're going up against a lot of big lobbying money, and we got bipartisan support for the last 2 years, so we carried it really, really far. And I think the language in the bill just wasn't enough to carry us through.
Well, maybe when we're ready to publish this episode, and Deanna will clip this section out specifically for a social media post clip that we can do, and then we'll tag Governor Newsom and tag California Governor on Instagram, because like he loves when I
tell them how important it is to support.
He loves when I comment, and his team loves when I comment and like on all their other initiatives, or on the homelessness progress, or on any of the. So we'll make sure to draw some attention to this one too. That's good for you.
Yeah,
I mean,
pharmacy is so complicated by design. Yeah. Unfortunately, meant to keep some of, I think, the wealthy people wealthy.
How many independent / community pharmacies are there here in California?
We have about 2,200 independent pharmacies.
All over the state, obviously.
All across. I would say about half of them are here in Southern California.
Yeah, sure.
I visited
the population.
Yeah, I visited a bunch, and there's a lot. There's surprisingly a lot in Sacramento, San Jose area.
Are there to finish off that question? Kind of, so the downside of these United States is there's 50 different business models, right? Is there a window through which federal legislation or federal input could be unifying or helpful, or is that this can't be solved at that level? It's all got to be state by state.
I think it can be. And the reason why I'm hopeful is the federal government was able to come out with a regulation sweeping across the nation about how we manage pharmacy supply chain and tracking to prevent counterfeit drugs from entering the markets. And This is where I think the interoperable exchange of information blurb just keeps coming back and back, and I see where it can be really effective when the federal government's able to step in and set the priority. I'm sure everyone will know execution is the difficult part. The federal government had enacted in 2013 that by 2023 everyone in the supply chain needs to be sharing information in a way that's easily translatable, regardless of what systems that you're using. We see that got delayed by a year, so it's going into enforcement this November. And then there's still waivers for smaller pharmacies because it's a lot of additional administration work.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's the downside, right? Is especially for your particular client base that you are serving and helping most. Like that's a lot of it can be seen as like excess burden, right? But then again, the transition to the future, to the Jetsons, is always excess burden somewhere. Like it can't happen. It can't happen without any burden, on all of us.
But the exciting thing about it is now the entire supply chain is on this electronic model, is required to be
Huge
on
progress.
an electronic model, which makes inventory management actually really, it's a lot more attainable at every level. Because right now in independent pharmacy, inventory management, do I have it? Do I not have it? Okay.
Right.
But
Sorry for interrupting. Does where RXPost sits inside, like the software, the tools that you're using, right? AI, all these things that you have the ability to unleash in future iterations of yourself. Do you have unique visibility to like all the different pockets of data, and therefore RXPost is not just like your policy advice is sound or sounder, but like future iterations of the tool and the platform can become more platform as opposed to tool.
Yeah, I mean, talk about reshaping the drug supply chain, right? We have unique insights into the utilization of all the pharmacies in our network, and how are we connecting those pieces of information with wholesalers to do maybe some short dated just in time ordering, but then ultimately, like, how do we get that real time prescription utilization data to the most important players, the manufacturers? We can then tell these drug manufacturers, hey, you manufacture drug A, you have inundated the market, it's saturated, we don't need any more. But this other drug that you manufacture, drug B, we're predicting a drug shortage. You need to start sourcing the active ingredient as soon as possible. You need to start swapping over all your manufacturing equipment because you don't want to miss out on this opportunity to prevent a public health crisis.
Right.
And for them, make money.
No, yeah. I mean, yeah, you're not right. No, you're helping it at all levels. Change doesn't necessarily have to be at the cost of anything. It could just be an enhancement, but it does require some adjustments in behavior, right? And choices, decision making by the businesses and their incentives, as you have said rightly from the very beginning. Yeah, it sounds like Mark Cuban should be an investor in your company as well. My goodness, right?
Feels like hey, 2 degrees of separation away from Mark.
Come on, Mark
Cuban. Want to talk? Let's talk.
Come on, Mark Cuban. We'll tag him on this thing too. We're going to use the hell out of this podcast when it publishes. I think I have. Yeah, it's 2 degrees, but they've probably gone dry. Yeah, I think I had 2 degrees. My old lawyer on my first startup in 98, 99, the internet 1.0, his best friend at the law firm that they were at was Cuban's lawyer on like the original deals that made Cuban rich.
Oh man!
Right, and so back then, Cuban was just like, again, roughly a little bit older than me. So back then, he was just this guy that you heard this crazy story about during Internet 1.0, who was like, launched like internet radio to listen to his Indiana Hoosiers games in his dorm room, kind of thing, right? And then it kind of went from there. But yeah,
it's funny that you bring up lawyer. Pharmacies is a surprisingly small world. I guess every industry is. My pharmacy attorney is 91, still very sharp.
That's awesome.
But he owned the independent pharmacy that I worked at, but several owners removed, right?
Okay, wow.
By the time I came to him, he knew the owner that I was working under. We swapping names, swapping stories. Yeah. Talk about nostalgia. He had this amazing story about treating the Pope.
I mean, 91 in 2024. So yeah, he was like, holy crap. He was born a long time ago. Like, he's seen it all. He's lived through it all.
Yeah, but I go hang out with him at his offices, and he's
what an incredible resource and friend, but what an incredible resource. And I would imagine in some ways mentor-ish kind of relationship.
Yeah, and I lean very heavily on I like to call them the pharmacy old guard. They understand way more than I do, and they've just really helped me kind of see beyond the things that I know in order to kind of predict some future problems and attack it from a broader scope. But in the meantime, you got to solve the niche thing and keep chucking away from there.
Yeah, no, 100%. Few questions before we get to our last segment. One, this is just total personal curiosity, right? So when you were graduating from UC San Diego, tolling around La Jolla in those early years of your career. Like, did you ever foresee yourself being an entrepreneur and raising venture capital, building a business?
No, no, not at all. I was just thinking, before I go to pharmacy school, I got to
Right.
put some more years in being a technician so I can save up money. And then, when I got to LA, I did work at an independent pharmacy in Beverly Hills. And she was this just really amazing, strong female pharmacist and owner, really clinical, really empowered me to make my own decisions. And like, it's those little interactions in life that have changed the trajectory to get you
Yeah.
to where you are today.
100%.
And even I think up until a year or two ago, I didn't consider myself an entrepreneur until some pharmacy school students, they asked me to speak at their event. I was like, why would you want me to speak at your event? I'm just a pharmacy technician.
Right.
And they're like, no, you're an entrepreneur. You're a pharmacy entrepreneur.
You're like,
And
wait, what? Am I?
yeah,
Holy crap.
and that was probably like the start to like changing and shifting that mindset of like my self-confidence as an entrepreneur.
Yeah. What you're a few years into I like accepting that about yourself now. What's the scariest part of being an entrepreneur?
Constantly the imposter syndrome. I think, right? Everyone's going to talk about that, and it's real. Every single day. I'm just like, it's this roller coaster of
I'm just a pharmacy tech.
I'm just a pharmacy tech, and it's just like, no, like look where I am today, and it's not like these things haven't fallen into my lap. I've worked really hard to get here. I've taken a lot of chances, like
absolutely
gotten a lot of no's, but gotten just enough of the right yeses.
And you are 100% exactly where you are right in this moment right now, having this conversation with me, because you were a great pharmacy tech.
Yeah.
Like, and you had your eyes open, and your mind works in such a way, right? Because that was one of the things, like in your background information, right? It says you describe yourself, others describe you like you've always been on the hunt for problem solving, right? Like you're a problem solver by nature.
Yeah.
And so you have it in your DNA. And again, this is my, trying to change the world to broaden the thesis around, like, help people understand. We have lots of entrepreneurial thinkers in this world who aren't necessarily entrepreneurs or investors. And frankly, they don't have to be. Like, now you've taken it, you were an entrepreneurial thinker, I think, in my thesis, right? Long before you ever became an entrepreneur. Now you just happen to be an entrepreneur. Like, you happen to be commercializing your instinctive entrepreneurial thinking skills that were baked into you probably long ago, and then were reinforced by women, other people like the OG guard, your old guard of the pharmacy industry, like your lawyer, like this woman that you worked with. Which, by the way, I got to ask you a question, because you just made me think of this. Like, what percentage of independent pharmacies are male owned or female owned?
I don't have the statistics on ownership.
Would you guess?
It's definitely from an ownership perspective, more men, but as a profession, I do know 65% of pharmacists are women.
Okay, so she was maybe unique as an example because she was the pharmacist owner, but she wasn't unique in the profession itself, which obviously, again, you were studying these studies when you were in college.
Yeah.
That's
and I don't know, how it's changed since my
That's a whole other podcast. That's a whole other podcast. You could refer or research beforehand, and we could come on and talk about that. Like, talk about the disparity and equity in ownership and operation of pharmacies and the makeup of the communities that they're in. That's a whole other thing. All right. So kind of last big one before we get to the end is, you touched on it a little bit, but I want to give you a chance to talk more about it. Right. So you talked about maybe we should be at the Jetsons at some point in the not too distant future, right? Like, kind of use our metaphor we've been using. So talk about like where AI and big data, where technology plays a role in the lives of these independent pharmacies who, as we talked about at the beginning, like probably some of them view the fax machine as technological innovation.
Yeah. I think for the foreseeable future, like the next year or two, AI in healthcare serves more to be, like an office assistant more than anything, because there's so much data right now that just isn't being used to its full potential without AI, right? Like, there's a lot that we accomplish with good old fashioned algorithms when it comes to inventory
Yep.
and data and like kind of forecasting what patient needs are. But as I think the AI model gets really sophisticated, so there are drug companies, life science companies, manufacturers that are utilizing AI to practice, molecule folding to come up with the next drug at a significantly less cost.
Okay.
And I think that's where we kind of go in the next 5-10 years is there needs to be enough data from the drug development side, which is really exciting, to hopefully bring down some of those costs.
Yeah. And again, then this begins to trickle throughout the entire system. Yeah, I'm not the crazy hype man AI person that just about everybody is, or pretty much every podcast is nowadays. I've always believed it has the potential, like you said, to be an incredible tool, but it's also kind of an overlay for other technologies that were the hot hype technologies of the last like 10 to 15, 20 years that we just seem to now have like just skipped over and forgotten about. But like, I like the way you just described that. That was actually the best description I've heard in a long time of AI kind of unleashing underlying machine learning, right? AI enhancing big data usage, AI, running alongside or overlaying the blockchain, right? Which was what all everybody talked about, like in 2021.
Yeah, and AI is top of mind. Like every year, we have an annual policy discussion, and AI is coming up. And where do we want to take a stance on it? How do we feel about it as it's evolving? How to utilize it best in our practices, but in a way that's protecting the patient.
That's awesome, because to me, the biggest analogous technology advancement, like leap forward, was, again, my younger years, the internet, right? And at that point, the assumption was just like, again, all up and to the right, like, oh, just unleash this thing and it's obviously going to be good for everybody all the time, right? Although I still worry that there's not enough introspection that you describe at like the macro level of government and industry, et cetera. And there always are nefarious, just purely capitalistic interests at play. But I love hearing that you're like saying, like in your community, in your industry, your subsector level, there are thoughtful conversations about AI that there weren't 35 years ago about the internet, quote unquote. Because that encourages me. We're much more likely to wind up on the side of at least some modest like protections and thoughtful usages, as opposed to just like a wild unleashing of the bulls, right, to run around the streets as they please.
Yeah, I mean, pharmacists have to do continuing education, so many credits, and we have a continuing education course this November, AI in pharmacy.
Awesome. That's great. Like you said, top of mind, and better to be thoughtful about it than not. Okay, one last question. This is a chance for you to just extol the virtues of RXPost again before we get into the last kind of closing section question. Why should investors see this market that you've uncovered, this market opportunity? Why should they see that as a huge opportunity for them?
So capturing billions of dollars in lost revenue, like that's just kind of the wedge that we're using to win the market. And there's no doubt that the pharmacy market is massive, but really reshaping the supply chain in a way that's utilizing data in a predictive manner to help every stakeholder in the supply chain run more efficiently and save on costs. Like this is where we're going, no matter what, right? Like this is what's being unlocked for us, and I will be the person to get us as far as possible.
I love it. That's awesome, and a powerful pitch for Mark Cuban to listen to. All right, so let's take it all the way back, right, to your roots. Let's go back to the beginning. That is incredible. Our discussion about technology and AI is incredible. Our nuanced discussion about all the layers of the industry and the inefficiencies is incredibly useful. But at the root, I feel like you serve people. As I've just spent an hour plus getting to know you, like I feel like you fundamentally serve the people, the human beings. The 91-year-old former pharmacy owner who's the lawyer, who's your advisor and friend and mentor, right? And you're thinking of the woman who, like you, is the pharmacy tech at some local pharmacy that I'll walk past on probably on Hillhurst or Vermont Avenue in Los Feliz in the next couple of weeks, and I'll think of you after I do. So let's talk to those people. And let's talk about not just their day-to-day work. Let's talk about like how you've used your voice to advocate. What are 2 or 3 ways that current pharmacy professionals can themselves become more involved in advocating for the types of legislative changes that they know we need to see in their community? Like what 2 or 3 ways that they can become involved, or maybe what 2 or 3 resources or organizations can you recommend that people, if they're a pharmacy, if the next Amantha is currently a pharmacy tech and she's just as passionate about this as you are, and she thinks to herself, like, I know we've got to do this, we've got to change this law, we've got to change this rule. What are the 2 or 3 suggestions you're going to give to her on what she should do next?
Get involved at the local level, and what that looks like is your local chapter of either the California Pharmacists Association, which really represents a lot of retail, or the California Society of Health System Pharmacists, which is a lot of the hospital systems, and they'll provide different resources. They love to have local events for pharmacists. I personally want to recruit more pharmacy technicians into the field. We outnumber pharmacists 2-1 in the state, and we just don't have as much representation. And I think it's really important for us to get more involved and have a say, because a good technician really makes or breaks a pharmacy.
Yeah, no, apparently, and good technicians turn out to be you. I mean, right? So like they have the potential, like because they're on the front lines, right? And that's a compliment to both, not just to you as the individual human and all your privilege and luck and hard work, but like where you were, right? A lot of what you have acquired as far as your perspective is as a result of like the spot in the system that you stood and worked very effectively at. And so
Yeah.
then there are lots of other, apparently from the statistics, lots of women in particular who are in those roles who, you're like the beacon, you're the example, like, hey, come on, like, let's all
Yeah.
go make change.
Yeah. And I would say you're not ever just a technician. You're
No way.
always so much more.
100%. That's true. That's incredible. Hey, we just met, but you're incredibly impressive as a person, and just your energy is really good, which I appreciate, because I think it takes good people, not perfect people, but just good people who are human and human centered, who think about the people that go through these different industries and processes. It takes those types of people who have some kind of empathy as well as intelligence and hard work to actually make any kind of change happen anywhere. And you are clearly that. So this has been both super educational and informative for me, but also I'm sure inspiring and really informational and interesting to the people that will listen. And I'm absolutely now committed to making sure that somehow we get Mark Cuban and Governor Newsom to listen to this episode for you. Now, I don't even care if they're listening for my benefit, but just for you.
I would really say, like if I can make an ask of your audience, is to, like if you love to support your local coffee shop or like your local bookstore, like think about your local pharmacy. And while maybe your insurance doesn't cover it at your local pharmacy, I mean, the next time you need toothpaste, right? Think of them. Don't think of CVS.
Yeah. Right.
And that will help, get these pharmacies through some of these rough times into where they're going, and it's going to be more clinical. It's really exciting.
Good for you. That's awesome. Thank you so much for this. Thanks for sharing, all of you, and just thanks for all the insights and knowledge.
Thank you for your time, Rob.
My pleasure. How can folks find you or follow you if you want people to find you, follow you on social, or find RXPost, or go log in or sign up or whatever?
Yeah, I mean, if you happen to be a pharmacy owner, you can go to rx-post.com. I encourage everyone to follow me and reach out if you have any questions on LinkedIn. That's what I check the most.
Awesome.
And, yeah.
Terrific. And I can promise you there will be some pharmacy people that will find this, because just based on the reactions you got to your post on LinkedIn about the mention of you in Nikki's episode, and I saw how many people were like viewing that and commenting to you, and a lot of those people were pharmacists. So you've obviously developed a trusted network and community of people that are excited that you're doing the work. So I suspect we just got to get this episode in their hands so they can listen to the whole story. So this is awesome. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that episode as much as I did recording it. As always, we thank you so much for listening and watching. Today's show was recorded here in Los Angeles and produced by the incomparable Deanna Bernal in Mexico City. You know, we can only grow this show by you listening and sharing the show with friends. So please find, like, follow, subscribe, and share our audio-only show on Spotify, Apple, or via any other popular podcasting platforms, as well as find the video version of our show now available on our YouTube channel over at Entrepreneurial Thinkers. And of course, you can follow along on our various social media platforms for fun and informative clips and content at Entrepreneurial Thinkers, wherever you can find us. And if you'd like to connect with me, you can find me at I Am Rob Ryan on just about any social media platform. Gracias, thank you, and have an awesome day.